I think we've all earned it, haven't we? Well, welcome today. My name is John Oldham. I'm the programming assistant here at the museum, and every spring we are delighted to welcome Fourth Line here to share a little bit of what happens behind the scenes at Fourth Line, which for me is just pure magic. I'm not personally involved with the theater, but I love it from an observational standpoint. So it's a great treat for me to welcome you here and to be involved. And I'd like to introduce you to Kim Blackwell, who's the Managing Artistic Director.
I am, yes,
Fourth
yeah.
Line.
That's big news in my world.
That's great. And Kim's going to be speaking with Alex Poch-Goldin, who is the, well, you're going to find out. You probably know.
Yeah, no, he probably needs, oh, there's people talking. He probably needs no introduction. We'll let my dad come in and sit down. My parents, if you ever wonder why I'm really, really early, it's because my parents were always really, really late. I came in my chair, because I have way shorter legs than you. I was sitting on this chair, and then it went down. Oh God, that's not, nobody, I know, they're like crazy. Absolutely one of my favorite things to do every season in advance of the season starting is my in conversation with somebody important to the upcoming season. And for 2015, besides Robert, I think there's nobody more important to the season than Alex Poch-Goldin, the playwright of the Bad Luck Bank Robbers. And it's exciting for me to sit here and have a conversation with you. Most of you will know that Alex. What do you have to do now? Are we too close?
Space between us.
Alex first came to us with The Right Road to Pontypool. He wrote The Right Road to Pontypool for us. And it was a huge hit for us. And in fact, it was so successful the first year, we brought it back. And it was incredibly successful the second year. And it was about the Jewish summer resort community in Pontypool, Ontario. It spanned 60 years. We had a character who was a teenager for 32 years, and I always think the strength of the writing is nobody ever mentioned that. The artists would do it. They would kind of do the math, and they'd come up to me like, do you know Doris is a teenager from like 1930 to 1970? I'm like, we don't talk about it. Like, it's just the basis of this play is we don't talk about the fact that Doris, our lead character, is a teenager for 3 decades. And nobody ever mentioned it over 2 summers. So I think that's the quality of the writing. So welcome, Alex.
Thank you guys for coming.
We're so thrilled you're all here on this beautiful day. I was thinking, oh, will anybody come today? And then I thought, it's supposed to be really nice today, which is like prescient for what it's going to be like the next time we see you all at the farm, where it's going to be warm and sunny and gorgeous and not rainy. And we're going to see the world premiere of Alex's show, which I'm so lucky to be directing. Alex, I wanted to ask you about, Alex was born and raised in Montreal, and he went to trained at the Dome Theatre at Dawson College. Were you writing even as a kid?
I did. I used to write like compositions and stuff in school. I remember having a dream several years ago about finding an old notebook that had little stories in it, and I was so happy to find it. I'd lost it for like my entire life. But for some reason, I had been separated from the group. This is like grade 2, and I found myself against the wall, and I don't know why. I've made up for penance now, but I wrote stories during that time, and then a couple of occasions I was asked to read them to the class, which was really edifying too. And my mom used to write poetry. She had like reams and reams of poetry in her dresser drawer that she never did anything with, and it was just an inspiration that there was a secret writer in the family. It really inspired me.
So you were an actor of some note and renown before you picked up the pen and started to write. I mean, you had Angels in America, 44 Weeks at Canadian Stage. I mean, you've been doing a lot of writing, and then you got a fringe spot. Is that the truth? Is that the first of the sort of the adult writing is the fringe spot, and you had to write something for it? Or is that the lore?
I had written a play for the Quebec Drama Festival. I grew up in Montreal, so but Drama Festival was a play about Yom Kippur. Anyway, it didn't end up getting into the festival, and then after that, I dabbled. I wrote scenes. I went to theater school. I was interested in theater and read lots of plays and stuff, and loved reading plays. And then we got into the Fringe Festival, which we didn't expect. Actually, it was before that we had been involved in the Fringe initially. Actually, John Tench, who's here, was a colleague of mine, and he was in the first Fringe show that we put together, a play called War Play, and we did it at the Fringe Festival, and it changed. It went through a lot of incarnations and stuff, and We were all kids, we were doing a collective thing all together, also living in the same house, drinking a lot of beer, doing theater, and then we did the Fringe show, which actually did quite well for what it was at the time. And then my friend Martha applied to the Fringe Festival with my wife's company, and we didn't have a play. And so I...
as actors do when it's a lottery.
I went into journals, and I kept journals for years. I still have them, and there were dreams and thoughts and ideas and little plays and snippets and things and stuff. And I found an excerpt from a dream, and I thought it was really intriguing. And I began to write something inspired by that. And then I worked with my wife, Kelly Thornton, and we sort of expanded it and started to use it as a premise for this Fringe Festival show. And we did it in the Fringe Festival. And it was not perfect, but she had also said to me that we should try to get Randy Hewson, who was a very popular, he's still popular, he works in Stratford now, but a very popular actor at the time, and I had just done a workshop with him, so I asked him to do the play. He didn't understand the play at all, but he liked me and he wanted to work with us. So he came and he did the play, and it was challenging and stuff, but it got the cover of Now magazine, and it generated a lot of buzz, and the run sold out, and then there was interest to remount it, and that actually dragged on for a long time through Canadian Stage. And Canadian Stage was saying, we were interested in producing this play, and once a month for about 8 months, I get a phone call saying, don't give away the rights, don't give away the rights. But they wouldn't do anything. And then I finally had a meeting, they promised me a place to go and write the play, like expand the play, and have an office and stuff, and then it never came to fruition. It just never did. And they wouldn't sort of follow up on the conversation. So it was difficult that way. And then we took it to Pass Mariah, and Pass Mariah said, yes, we want it. So I started doing more development, and then we presented it to Pass Mariah. It opened their season. It was a top grossing show in Toronto in 2000. It was a great company, it was a great show. It got translated into German and French. There was a French production, the German production never happened. And then another production in Pittsburgh, an independent company did it, and we went down and saw that too. So it was great. It didn't, I remember after working for like 5 years on the play and doing well at the box office, I walked away with $3,000, which it was great. I mean, I was happy to have that money for the work that I had done. I'd never gotten paid so much money for working on a play before. And that sort of started me going and developing more stuff. And the summer that we did This Hotel, I had another piece that I'd heard some snippets of conversation on the bus one day. These two guys talking about the beer store and how the beer store used to be there, but now it's gone. We used to have great beer there. We used to get it, was cold, it was really good. And so they talked that way, and I took down some notes, and then I kept them for about 7 years, and then I sat down and I wrote the play.
Is that Jim and Shorty?
And it was called Jim and Shorty.
Okay.
And we did it in Summerworks following This Hotel in the Fringe Festival. This is all in Toronto. And the show did quite well as well. And so it was like a 1-2 punch with the Fringe and Summerworks, which is a great way for independent artists to get a chance to get their work out there. And then Bravo and Marilyn Lightstone had heard about the play, and they did a show, I forget what the show was called, but they would film like hour-long pieces, the name's escaping me. And so they dragged this on for about 6 months too, and then finally we filmed it with Earl Pascoe and Ron Gabriel. And on the day when we were supposed to film it, the guy was there, he had all the information and stuff, and then suddenly he doesn't show up. And Marilyn Lightstone, who's Moses Znaimer's wife, she's on CFMX, she's a very lovely lady, and she said, the director got served with divorce papers today, so he's not going to be sure. So she directed it with my assistance, and it was great. It's like just great to have a little package of your work, because when we do theater, certainly as an actor I know it, as a writer at least you write it, it's maybe published, if you're lucky, and people get to share it or produce it, but when you're an actor and you just do something and it's gone. So it's nice to have some kind of record of it. There's certainly a visual one, a recorded version of it.
That's amazing. I'll just tell you that I was at the opening night of This Hotel at Pass Mariah in that 2000, 2001. I just moved to Toronto and I was working at Canadian Stage. And we have a mutual friend that we don't know, like we don't have a shared experience with him, our friend Brad Brackenridge. Brad, who a lot of you would know, Peterborough actor based right now, and puppeteer. And I went with him, and you and Kelly were literally like at the height. You were the it couple in Toronto then. I mean, it's not been all downhill by any means since then. I don't mean that. But you really, I mean, you were quite big stars in Toronto. It's interesting to think about how, you know, you and I have developed our relationship first through Pontypool and now through the Bad Luck Bank Robbers. I wanted to ask you, you had been to Fourth Line before we approached you about the Right Road to Pontypool. So you had an experience with the theatre, right?
I had come out and done Arbor when Brian Richmond was running it, and I did a production of Romeo and Juliet in combination with Ubu the Barbarian by Paul Ledoux, which is a classic. You won't forget it if you saw it, let me tell you. Unless you were amongst that group that left at intermission. We didn't have to finish the second half of the show that day. We went fishing instead and Rest Lake.
Is that for real?
That's a true story.
Really? Nobody came back for the second act?
Nobody came back. But during that time, in Romeo and Juliet, I met Brad, who ended up being best man at my wedding. Now I'm separated, so he wasn't very useful. But yeah, I came out and I saw the Great Farini at the farm, and I was really quite blown away by it. It was really quite incredible. That was my first experience, and I mean, just the work itself was just amazing. So I came back several times over the years. I went back at Arbor again after that.
Well, Arbor wasn't really back at Arbor much after that, yeah. So, you know, it was interesting, I was working at Canadian Stage, and I was fairly close to Iris Turcotte, who was the dramaturge then, and it must have been, this is the period where this hotel might have been happening. You were working on Yard Site, which is another play that, it hasn't been done in Canada, but you've had 2 or 3 German productions of Yard Site?
One production that toured Germany twice.
Oh, okay, okay.
And then I was very fortunate. I got a grant from the Canada Council, and I went down and I saw it. And it had played actually some big theaters, but I had seen it in a place called Aschheim, just outside of Munich. And it was basically like a community center, but they had a little stage there. And it was a touring show, so they had, you know, they could set it up on stage and stuff. And there were, I don't know, 200 people there or whatever. And it was funny because I know the play, but it was in German, and there would just be little markers to let me know where we were in the play. And there were actually 2 jokes about Hitler in the play that only one person laughed at, and it wasn't me. Right? But they were, no, it was interesting because it's a Jewish family play, and it was being toured in Germany, and it did extremely well for them. So I got to see it, and they were very happy to have me there, and they brought me up on stage and gave me flowers afterwards, and then we all went up for drinks. And it was just charming to be there as like the foreign Canadian writer who's come in and kind of just well received and supported. So and it was a lovely play. It was great to see it. I had written the play. I thought Canadian Stage had commissioned it. I thought they were going to produce it. Then they didn't, and then a couple of other theaters had been interested too, and I thought it was going to go, and then it didn't, for whatever reasons. And the play's also about Middle Eastern politics. It's a little bit, not completely. It's really about a family that's migrated from Montreal to Toronto post Parti Québécois government, and it's a family comedy, really is what it is. But it hasn't had a chance to be produced, and if it ever did, I'd probably have to do some updates because things in the Middle East have changed so much. And I try to be certain general and specific at the same time, but sometimes the politics is just very hard to control. Plays. I just did a play, and it has a reference to Condoleezza Rice in it. So I'd rather be compared to Condoleezza Rice was her line, and the play's like about 8 years old, and it's funny to me because it dates it in a specific time, and it could still do it. You could do a play in 20 years' time, but Condoleezza Rice is not some kind of international figure. I'd say something like Hitler and stuff, but
Yes.
But I try to have the plays have a kind of timeless quality. Is my intent.
I read, I was reading in preparation for this, I read some of Alex's work, and so I read Yard Site again. I had seen a workshop of it at Canadian Stage. And is it about you and your dad?
I guess it inspired largely by the character of Meyer. He suffered a stroke, and he's planting trees in Israel, but he's getting money from his son for medicine, and he's had a stroke, and he's supposed to be taking therapy and stuff, and his son is helping support him, and the son is giving him this money, but he's not using the money for therapy or for medicine. He's using it to plant trees in Israel.
For his ex-wife.
For his ex-wife as a memorial to her. And the son doesn't know about it, and the son is against the Israeli government and a supporter of Palestinian peace. So they come to loggerheads about that. So I certainly drew on it a lot. He was a very interesting and easy character to write. Iris actually encouraged me at Dramaturgy Canadian Stage to explore my father, because he was quite a character. May he rest in peace. And so there was, he's so much inside of me, and I understand his rhythms and stuff. So he came quite easily, and I enjoyed exploring him. He's a bit outrageous and stuff, and sometimes when I'm acting too, I'm channeling him, and for better or worse. And sometimes I need to maybe keep it under control because he was larger than life.
But there's a beautiful scene where the son in that is doing the feet, the toenails of the father, and I just wondered, like, was that the kind of stuff you did for your dad?
Not really, no.
Okay.
My mom was diabetic, so my dad had to cut my mom's toenails sometimes. So that might have been the reason why that was there.
It was interesting because it is a really lovely play. I guess I just thought of you and your sister. I don't know why those two characters made me think of you and Catherine.
You know, write what you know, not what you don't know, write what you know. It's an adage that I come back to. And I don't mind the idea of, like, I want to do something theatrical that's just for my imagination and project it. But I always like to try to write something that's of a different genre. I just think, like, as an actor, I don't want to do the same kind of play each time. I'd rather have the opportunity to do things that contrast each other and expand the repertoire. And so as a writer, I try to do that as well. And that was certainly the art site was a family drama, a comedy, as opposed to something like This Hotel, which is a surreal drama. Or The Life of Jude, which is another play, which is a big biblical musical epic. So just whatever thing.
Very salty. I just read it this morning. It's very salty.
Just try. I mean, to go with what comes out of your heart and stuff, but to try to find that voice. And with the art site, my father's voice and my grandfather's voice came out.
They seem really strong. The voices seem so authentic. I guess that's why I'm asking about it. So, I was working at Canadian Stage, and you were working in new play development there, and Robert had this idea for the play about Pontypool, and I went to the reunion in Pontypool that June. I don't even know when that was. Was that 2003 now? 4? I don't remember. Could be that long ago. And I approached you about it, and I'm just curious what you thought about the idea. I don't know, do you have a memory of when I first approached you at
Well,
Canadian
I think it's
Stage?
probably the first time that somebody that I wasn't trying to get a job with was offering me an opportunity in terms of being a writer. So that was encouraging. And I remember Kim told me that Marty Bragg, who ran Canadian Stage, at the time that you were looking to ask Adam Peddle. I think Robert had suggested Adam Peddle because Adam Peddle did Zadie Shoes and he was a hot writer and stuff like that. And then you had said, no, I think Alex Poch-Goldin should be the one. So I was really happy that opportunity had happened. I was doing new play development at Canadian.
Yeah, no, but I'm just curious, like, when I think we probably did we give you the book first? Grant Curtis's
got Grant's book, and my family had, from Montreal, again, Jewish family, so instead of Pontypool, where all the poor Jews from Kensington Market went to Pontypool, my family went to the Laurentians. And there were limitations there as well, and signs that said no dogs and no Jews allowed, and beaches that the Jews couldn't go to, and things like that, and hotels that they couldn't go to. My parents actually met there. They sort of had a connection, but they sort of met there. So it was interesting to me to kind of think that it was like a mini Catskills. Pontypool was, in the same way that the Laurentians were. Maybe in my mind, the Laurentians are a little maybe
more upscale.
But I don't know that that's well compared to Pontypool. How could they not?
How could they not be? It was a cow pond. We've seen it. It was a cow pond, right?
So they would rent a house, and then they went out together. And then I remember my mother was dancing with my father, and he said, "You don't remember me, do you?" And she said, "No." And he said, "How about now?" And then he kissed her, and he said, "You remember me now?" And she said, "No, but do it again." And they had some connection because somebody had died in her family, and my father's family knew that, so he ended up coming over to the Shiva house, and they had met on that occasion. So a funeral sort of brought my family together.
Do you remember how you got into the writing of the Pontypool story? Do you remember where you started with it, or how you
Grant had
approached
given me the book, and the book was really interesting. So I took a ton of notes, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I'd never done kind of like
a commission in this way?
a commission that was like a historical drama, which was really super exciting. And I even get more excited about it now because I'm always like amazed how many stories there are. And the swath is bigger. Even to take something like Andrew Moody's play, which is a wonderful play, which is not specifically centered here, but it's historical and
You mean Real McCoy?
Real McCoy.
Real McCoy, yeah.
But to know that that Havelock has a story and Pontypool has a story and Peterborough
And Trenton has a story.
There's so many stories out there, and they're worth being told. So I was keen to unearth it, and Grant had also given me some cassettes of interviews with Larry Lofchick and Doris Mineta and all these different people. And so I listened to these cassettes, and I began to just take notes on the things that were interesting to me. And I found that it's really interesting, and I think it's inspired the way that I write a lot. And I'm grateful to Robert and you for that as well, because I think I'm working on a piece now, which is a musical piece that I'm doing with James Kudelka, who's a choreographer and a composer.
Used to be the artistic director of the National Ballet of Canada, who is one of Alex's main collaborators right now.
And a dance company called Coleman Lemieux. And so we did an adaptation of a book by Edith Wharton called The House of Mirth. And now we're working on another book called Against the Grain. And I'm kind of like, I'm taking what inspires me. Against the Grain is like 16 chapters of this guy who turns his back on society and moves to this house, and he spends time obsessing about the colors in the house. Then he spends time obsessing about perfume, and so each chapter has a sort of unique quality. And I'm just taking what inspires me, and the language is incredibly rich, and there's so much of it. It's kind of like, I'm just going to take that, because that's a nugget, and I like that, and I like that, and make a list and construct something out of just that list. And maybe I'll create some stuff that's just from my own mind, because I need to change the rhythms of the language. Or I will just base it entirely on the words that the writer has provided. And I find it's just a really interesting way to kind of go like, I can sit down and I can put my own ideas down on paper, but when I'm using another source material, I'm starting to find a rhythm for how to do that, of the things that I want to pull from it. So we're working on another play we're starting with The Great Shadow, and it's about Trenton film studio days and first Canadian film studio. And I'm looking forward to just like we're going to have a reminiscence and talk to people and get stories and maybe see postcards or clips or like ideas or a newspaper article about what they know about it, and use that kind of as a basis. And then there's more research available from other sources as well, and sort of cobble something together. I've already written one scene, and then start to write some other scenes, and then the people start to come to life. And it's like really thrilling when that happens, and knowing that the resources for development at Fourth Line they're really super awesome. And also the fact that you don't have to limit yourself to do a play with 5 people, which I would love to write for Fourth Line, but the opportunity to do it with 25 is so much more interesting.
What was that like with Pontypool to be able to write we had 42 or 43 in the cast, but there was 120 characters, there was 2,500 costume pieces. It was epic. What was it like to write on that scale?
I think you just write it one scene at a time, and then suddenly you kind of count them up, and you realize, oh my God, there's a lot of people here. How do we have different costumes?
That's my job, right? How do we pay for the costume?
So that's kind of really what happened. It's like, oh well, we'll need somebody else here. Like I wasn't on first passes and stuff. I was just writing to get the sheer volume of ideas and scenes out, and stuff has to be sacrificed. It's always, I find, better to write too much and then cut away. But the other parts of it were that, there was a beach, and so it was really amazing to me when I saw it, because I hadn't done a Fourth Line show before. And just suddenly, like, there's a scene's happening here, but then there's like 4 other people who are crossing, who are going to the beach, and 2 other people there, and other people, like, there was a whole life that was being created. So you start to be able to think about what the bigger, broader picture is of the play, and that you have access to so many resources. So. With Pontypool, I just I just took the trip. I didn't try to edit myself at the beginning. I let it go too long, and then I think we just scaled back afterwards, and we ended up with that many characters. When you told me how many were speaking, I was like, I had no idea.
What was it like, that reaction? Because what I remember about Pontypool first and second year was the audience reaction, and so many people who had a connection to Pontypool. Jews came from New York City and so far away, and whenever I'm in Toronto, if you ran into someone who's Jewish of a certain age and you start to talk to them, they went to Pontypool. Maud Rose is a dentist, her pediatric dentist. He went to Pontypool as a child, Dr. Rubenfeld. So what was that like, that reaction you got?
I think the first gauge was like the scene at the very beginning when Moish Yukel Bernstein is coming out on the horse and wagon, and he's asking if this is the right road to Lindsay, and then the pastor, he's an Orthodox
Christian,
Orthodox Jew in a horse and wagon, who ends up meeting a pastor just outside of Pontypool, and he says, is this the right road to Lindsay? And the pastor says, no, this road takes you to Pontypool, just over that hill. And then Moise says, Pontypool? Where the hell is Pontypool? And it would get a laugh from the audience, and it made me relax so much when that happened. Certainly on the first night, in the previews, to know that there was this humor. Like, I don't know where my sense of humor comes from, but it's really important in the work that I do, and I like to share laughter and joy. And the play started to fire on those cylinders, and it has a lot of tacky one-liners in it, you know, and I get blamed for telling a lot of dad jokes.
Not tacky at all.
But people love them, you know. There was one joke, because Richard Greenblatt, who played it in the second year, he was like, I don't understand, these are the worst jokes ever written. And they kill every night.
It made Richard very unhappy as a playwright. So.
Richard says to Ellie Ray Hennessy, Doris Meta, he says one night, he says, did you ever go with Bernie Faber? He says, Bernie Faber? He only had one eye. And Richard says, that's why they called him a good looker.
I know, it's a bit of a groaner. Well, and then we had a funny experience where we had sold a cameo to somebody at one of our auctions, our galas, and the folks that own Knock on Wood, Dave Medill, bought it for his daughter Rachel, who was 9 years old. So we wrote a little scene for her. And even the joke you wrote for the 9-year-old was kind of like a 7-year-old Jewish Montreal man's humor. Do you remember the joke?
The joke was, what's the matter, little girl?
Yeah, Sam Mineta says the little girl's really angry looking.
She says, Mom says now that we're here we can't have bacon. And he says, bacon? Why do you want to eat bacon? Bacon stunts your growth. And she says, that doesn't matter, we live in a bungalow. When
I read it and I had to rehearse the little girl in, I was like, oh my gosh, and the little girl got a laugh. So there you go.
She did, and then she looked down at the audience with a big smile.
What's your writing process like?
Oh, I don't know. I think I'd probably be a lot more prolific if I knew what that was, and I think it really depends on the project itself, like a commission versus something. You know, when I was writing, like, they came from my head. I would just sort of, and then suddenly you kind of go like, well, it's good to have commissions too. And I don't mind writing for commission. But also, not just because there's some money usually involved in it, but because there's deadlines. And it's harder for me to self-impose my own deadlines. So, like the thing that I'm writing now, this piece against nature, these 16 pieces, we got a little bit of money and that imposed a deadline, and so now I have 4 more pieces to write, and I hope by Tuesday or Wednesday this week it'll be done, and then I'll move on to the other thing. You know, it depends. Like with a fourth line show, it's different because there's so much information to gather that pertains to the topic, the film studio or Pontypool. There's information out there, go gather it, and then with something like that, I'll find the most interesting pieces, and I'll sort of decide a structure of scenes that I want to write. I want this to happen, this to happen, this to happen. I know that we have to get into some of the showing of the filming of the project, and then we can somehow convey the fact that the studio couldn't survive because the Ontario government sort of betrayed it. And but I don't want to do it like Pontypool was kind of like the rise and fall of this town. This play I wanted to treat differently. I wanted to treat it kind of like the advent towards getting a production going, the challenges of producing that film. The film comes out, and then maybe it just doesn't look so positive for the studio long term in the end. Sort of convey.
Or the studio politics swirling around the filming kind of thing. Maybe.
Yeah, and I mean it's interesting too because we'll talk about that, or I'll come up with an idea with Kim and Robert, and you know we'll bash stuff back and forth about what potential ideas are, what could work, what wouldn't work. But with other things, they just sort of come out of your head, and you write them, and then you try to structure them into something. I find that harder to do now somehow than when I used to. The first play I ever wrote. It wasn't even a computer. It was like I started writing by hand, and then a friend had like sort of a typewriter that had a screen that was about this big, and it would hold information. But I lost information a couple of times. It just disappeared, and I had to start again. But that was like something that it was a metaphorical, poetic text about my girlfriend who had been anorexic. That's sort of what it was about, and I was inspired to tell the story about an artist and anorexic in a sort of symbolic kind of environment. So I think it's always different, and the genres make it different. With The Life of Jude, I had an idea, I was responding to things, I was responding to 9/11 in a way, I was responding to my own self-loathing at a particular time, I was responding to notions of injustice. I wrote something, I put it away, I pulled that out again, I started to expand on that, I wrote a scene, that scene became the beginning of a parable, I started to tell a story about this boy who grows up in a loving environment, his father gets taken away, he ends up being raised fundamentalist by the church, can no longer distinguish between being a good person and being a good Christian, and ends up causing damage because he becomes inflexible with his understanding of
The religious
Scripture. Scripture. And that, as I was saying to you before too, that was kind of like a response to Wahhabism and what's his name there, Osama bin Laden, and that group of people who could only see their religion and not notions of humanity and love, and how their religions were probably talking about humanity and love, but they could only see it through a very narrow lens. And not just in Wahhabism, but in Catholicism, in Christianity, in Judaism as well. And I think it runs the gamut. So I was just kind of trying to have a conversation about that. We ended up, and then oddly enough, with that play, I started writing that play 12 years ago, and it did a bunch of development at the Tarragon, and it worked with George Brown students, and it was interesting, and I thought it was going to go to production, and it didn't. It just fell away, and I had some little songs, short little songs in it, beginning or ends of scenes, that were kind of like in a Brecht play. You would find little snippets of song that Kurt Weill would do music for. And then I had pulled it out to do this project, this thing at Buzz at Theatre Passe Muraille, just like a 15-minute presentation or something they asked me to do. So I was like, I like this play, I keep coming back to this play, and I pulled it out, and we did 15 minutes. And then I thought, I should do something with this, so I sent it off to a couple of people, including David Ferry. And David Ferry sent it off to Albert Schultz at Soul Pepper, and to the National Theatre School in Montreal. And the National Theatre School said, why don't you come to Montreal and work with the students for 2 weeks and help develop this play and talk about this play. So David went down for a week, and then I was going to follow the second week. And and I went, the night I went down, my mom passed away, and I had to come back to Toronto like a day and a half later. So that was very unfortunate, because I really wanted to work with the students. But the great thing that came out of that was that the students began to develop music for those little songs. And then I began to write more songs. And the music was really good, and it got everybody excited. And then I did an edit of the play and included the songs, and I had the music, and we submitted to SummerWorks, and we ended up doing it, not this past year, but the year before, in 2013 SummerWorks Festival. It was the biggest show in SummerWorks history. We did it with 21 people. We had a fantastic cast of like A-list actors in Toronto. And we rehearsed it for a month, and everybody worked for free. They all walked away with $300 at the end, which was, with 20 people, actually it was more than 20 people, 21 people, plus like 6 or 7 designers and stuff. Everybody ended up getting their like $300, which is way more than a lot of people get, even when it's like 5 people working on a show, because it just happened to be successful. And we were organized, and we raised money online as well. So all those things helped a lot. And but it just shows that you can take an idea, the seed of an idea becomes something, grows into something, and then suddenly it has life with people around it, and people are putting money into it, and it's going up on stage, and you're sharing it with other people, and it's a great, fantastic thing. And I know playwrights who do make a lot of money and stuff. I make a certain amount of money from playwriting, but it's really more for the art of it than for anything else, and being able to share it and talk about it afterwards with people.
Do you still think of yourself more as an actor than a playwright?
You know, it's weird.
Like if you're going to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I always wanted to be an actor. I mean, I started writing before I was acting, but I always wanted to be an actor, and I took it so seriously. And after I went to school in Montreal, I went to school in Connecticut, and I was really dedicated to it. I just have so much respect for the craft, and I like to improve myself at it, and I like to challenge myself. It's like doing film versus theater in a way, where when you're doing film, you past a certain point, you might be making money, you go like, I'd like to do something of substance, something that really challenges me, as opposed to just doing a TV series or something. And then when you're doing a show that challenges you and has some substance, but pays you, you know, $750 a week, and you only have like, you know, 6 weeks of work, then you're kind of going like, how come all my pals are doing film or TV and making some real money? So it's kind of like what you're not doing looks greener on the other side of the fence. But I like to do them both, and I feel privileged that I can. You know, some people have second jobs to support themselves, whether it's waiting or
Joe jobs.
Joe jobs.
Is playwriting your Joe job? You'll make
Yeah.
some playwrights very sad to hear you.
Well,
no, but you know that's you're so lucky to have that
It's
as your
just
Joe
that
job.
I feel fortunate, and I do some teaching now too for the first time that I've never done that before, but I'm teaching playwriting and acting. And that's great too, because it teaches me about myself and about the process as well. But I think I wear different hats at different times, and like I'm gonna be a playwright this summer, and I'm really looking forward to that. And I was gonna do the play. My daughter's gonna be in the play. I wrote a part for my daughter and for Maud Rose as well to be in together to play sisters. And so that's really special to me. And I thought I was gonna be able to do the play as well, but I'm doing another show and it precludes doing that.
His first Soul Pepper gig.
So I'm really happy about that.
Yeah,
But
that's
I.
exciting. And a play you guys have been workshopping for a long time at Soul Pepper, right?
Yeah.
It was being workshopped, I'm sure, while we were doing Pontypool. The Dybbuk. It's the
10
Dybbuk.
years ago,
It's
so-
a Yiddish play?
Yeah, very
Yeah.
famous Russian play. But I'm also, I'm grateful because one of my greatest pleasures is actually to sit in the theater while a show of mine is being produced and just sort of sit there and say, I don't have to do anything, I did everything. It's up to other people now, so.
Can you watch the play or are you watching the audience?
Yeah, I'd love to watch the audience. I had a discussion with somebody the other day, but I'm sitting this way too. So if I'm looking at you guys, then you're looking at how's that going? And if I'm behind you, I can't see your faces at all. So it's kind of hard to do. I should sit in the stage manager's booth.
Yeah, one time we do that. It was funny when we did Breaking Ground of the Bad Luck Bank Robbers in this room a year ago. You were sitting down there because at the time you were workshopping Mirsky, the lawyer for the bank robbers. And the play, we started to do the opening bit of that play. I don't know if anyone saw that, Breaking Ground. And I think maybe it's one of the first monologues, or when one of the bank robbers turns to the audience and breaks the fourth wall and starts to talk about the rivalry between the Montreal Canadiens and the Toronto Maple Leafs. And this is how you were like, you were watching to see how the jokes landed. You were so intense, and the joke didn't land because it was this audience, our audience here, is very much, they bleed blue. They can bleed blue and love the Toronto Maple Leafs. And the play is not necessarily kind to the Toronto Maple Leafs from the point of view of the Montreal, the French bank robbers. So it was interesting. I mean, stuff eventually landed, but those first jokes.
In a sense, also, it's true. It's like, you know, it's like the play lives or dies on the humor, certainly when it's a comedy. And in that instance, I mean, stuff worked and people did enjoy themselves at the reading, but say a joke like that, where people are kind of being affronted by it, it built up a certain amount of tension, which I think ultimately is going to be useful for the play too, because all that tension gets diffused later. I can't tell you exactly.
No, but and ultimately it's a black comedy. You know, people have questioned me about the fact that the bank robbery was a really serious thing. They wore balaclavas, they had sawed-off shotguns, and so for me, directing it, I have thought long and hard for many months now about walking that razor's edge of the comedy and the tension with the real fear, especially in the bank.
You know, that sort of thing goes back to, for me, that any comedy can only succeed if it's a strong and taut drama, because it's through that tension, we release through the tension of a strong drama, and a drama can't build up enough tension without having a release into comedy as well. So I think that the tragic and comic masks, I think they're one face, just at different moments.
For sure. I wanted to ask you about the Bad Luck Bank Robbers. So, you know, we came to you with the idea, and there was a book, and the play is inspired by a book, a nonfiction book written by Grace Barker, entitled The Bad Luck Bank Robbers. And but then you sort of set the book aside, and I haven't looked at the book probably since, I don't know, was that 2008 or 9 maybe? And I've only been taking the play as it. And so, but tell me about how, because you set the book aside, and because it was only inspired by the book, how did you do your research? I mean, we did a Havelock reminiscence. Robert, that was 2010, because Rob, you were in England, right? When we did the reminiscence?
It was great. I mean, the reminiscence, it was because we didn't do one for Pontypool.
Well, we only did it with Doris and
Yeah.
Grant in the basement of the
Right.
Orange Hall, I think,
Yes.
in Pontypool. Maud Rose was 6 months, no, Maud Rose was like 3 months old.
I remember that.
Yeah.
So,
So we had we had the reminiscence in Havelock in 2010, and then what
right,
else
so
did you
I
do?
gathered notes from that, and I had read the book one time, the Bad Luck Bank Robbers, a non-fictional account which gave a lot of details, and then I put that down, and I went to the Ontario Archives, and when I got to the archives, there was a wealth of information there that I had no idea was there, and including the trial transcript, pre-trial transcript, which was, I don't know, 800 pages. And there I am at the archive going like, click with my camera, click with my, how am I going to do this? How am I going to, there's just too much information. And there were affidavits and other things as well. And so I bought the transcript.
Was it $150?
Something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
And I bought the rights. I bought the rights to it as well, to be able to publish, which we'll see if that can ever happen or not. But so there was so much information there, and photographs of the guys, and I had also had the reminiscence that we did in Havelock, and I'd driven up to Havelock. I went to go see, what's that town? North
River.
No, not North. Yeah.
You went to Norwood because you went to see
Norwood,
Gene
Norwood.
Kennedy.
Gene Kennedy, who had been a teller there. She was a young teller. And the tellers are characters in the piece, so I wanted to meet the people and talk a little bit about them, try to inspire, so that they inspire themselves, you know, in the play. And so Jean was very lovely. I thought she was going to have an affidavit too. She thought she had it, she didn't have it. But in the archives I found like statements from some of the tellers and stuff. None of them, aside from I think George Milliken, none of them were actually,
Called to testify.
they weren't witnesses at the trial.
Because the guys had been wearing the masks.
Yeah. But there were 2 or 3 other tellers at the reminiscence, and then
Yeah.
Quackenbush.
Well, Marie Quackenbush came from the United States.
That's right.
Unfortunately, we cut her out of the play.
Was she at that reminiscence?
Yes, she was at that reminiscence,
At that
and then I think Keith and Doug Webb and Keith.
Yeah, I forget too.
Yeah, but 4 of the tellers were there, including
But
Jean.
so it was so great to like have them there, and so I with that one I knew there was a very specific timeline that had happened. So the robbery happened on this day, so I proceeded with a scene like talking about the plans, and then the next day is the bank robbery, and then all of the mayhem that comes from that, including police investigation, and then the robbers on the run, and then whatever kind of local effect there is, and so that I can give a break to say the robbers on the run, and kind of like cut over here and see the police sort of sitting down waiting because nothing's going on, they're sitting in the hot sun, and then go back to the robbers over here and then cut over to that kind of thing, in a very sort of filmic way.
Yes.
Yeah,
As I get ready to stage it, yes.
It has that quality, but it's still, I think it's eminently theatrical at the same time too. And so that leads to, I mean, basically they're going to go to trial, and then the second half of the play is an exploration of what happens at the trial. And it was really interesting because there was so much information on the pre-trial hearing, and I folded that in. We'll see how effective it is. I folded it in because exhibits are introduced in pre-trial, and I folded the introduction of the exhibits into the trial itself, just to save time. I couldn't do pre-trial and another trial. It would be a 3-act play. But I took the characters that were most interesting to me and the evidence that was most interesting, because the thing about this play too is that it's all based on circumstantial evidence. They never found the money. They never admitted that they had committed the crime.
And there was no eyewitness. There was no eyewitnesses
There were
to
no
them
eyewitnesses
because they wore
were
the
all
masks.
yeah, so they all wore the masks. So it was just the trajectory was already clear as to what had to happen, and then what unfolded during the trial. I made a lot of changes to the transcript because it wasn't always that interesting, and but it was very helpful to me in terms of creating the narrative for what happens, and also to have sort of a counterpoint to what happens in the first half of the play, because the robbers are very front and center in the first half of the play. In the second half, they're still there. We get some of those cutaway scenes from the trial to them in their prison cell and stuff, but the trial is the engine of it, and it's a lot of help from the archives.
Yeah, so it's, what I love, I mean, it was interesting, so, when you got a first draft to me with that second act finally in it, and I was like, oh dear Lord, this is just all the, like, the stuff from the archives. He hasn't really written a second act. This is brutal. Like, that was like, my initial gut response.
A lot of stuff, yeah.
Yeah, and then we read it, and some of it wasn't very interesting, but there started to be this extraordinary pattern of the absurdity of the fact they were actually convicted on this circumstantial evidence. And I don't want to give too much away because I want you to all come and see it. But also it's a recognizable form, the procedural. We know that form from television, from Law and Order, and from all of the police, so the caper in the first 22 minutes and the court drama in the second 22 minutes. I mean, ours is longer than that, but in that 60 minutes of TV. So I started to really understand it, and I love procedurals, and I love whodunits. And even though we know whodunit is, still there's a lot of tension about whether they'll get convicted or not.
Whether they're convicted or not.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting because the lawyer who defends them, I think ultimately makes a very strong case for the fact that he tries to get people to swear that this piece of evidence is the one that was used in the actual incident. And they're like, it's pretty similar. It's like, it's not what I asked you. Is it the exact one? Well, I would say it's pretty similar. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking if it's the exact one. So you won't swear that this is the exact, no, I won't swear it. Thank you very much. So
And he was a hotshot lawyer brought in from Toronto.
From Montreal.
Oh, from Montreal. And he I can't imagine he thought.
Jewish lawyer.
Yeah.
I was gonna say. But he must have thought he was gonna kind of just come in and win this case with these country bumpkins here at the Peterborough Court System, and it didn't go his way.
No, I mean, that's a question of speculation what he really thought. But I mean,
Right.
I think he was very well prepared and stuff. Well, we're going to leave it up. We're not going to try and answer too many questions
No,
about
no,
what
no,
actually
yeah.
happened. Otherwise, just return your tickets.
Why did you decide to put stuff about Montreal and Toronto and the hockey rivalry, the great hockey rivalry, which, of course, being, I was raised in Peterborough, and my grandpa, who didn't like Catholics and didn't like French, was obsessively devoted to the Montreal Canadiens. Obsessed. He grew up in Montreal. It was such a strange thing, but he hated French. My mom's dad, my grandpa, Blackwell, and hated Catholics, but loved the Montreal Canadiens with a devotion I didn't even know existed. But then now I know you and Robert have the similar devotion, and I know Kelsey's a Toronto Maple Leafs. So you're Montreal, okay. So why? Why did you put that in? Why did you layer that in?
Big hockey fan. I used to be bored of it. My grandfather would have it on the TV. He's like, "Can't we watch Walt Disney?" It's like, the game is on. And I think I just began to, those bastards can't pass in the years when they weren't doing very well. But so somehow it went into my blood too, and I only went to a few games in my life, really, when I was living in Montreal. But it was there, and I think one of the things that came out of doing Pontypool, which was interesting to me, was I think I was searching for a rivalry. I was searching for episodes of anti-Semitism, and I didn't really find them. From the people that I had talked to and stuff, to create a greater divide, but there was a divide that was already evident. It was like one group of people coming with another group of people. So 2,500 Jews would come to this town of 300 Protestants, and they would converge, and life would happen, and there would be effects because of that. And that was a beautiful thing. And you can exploit a certain amount of tension out of it, so it's two other solitudes coming together, and
The English and the French.
The English and the
Yeah.
French. But in this case, it's the English and the French, or the Protestant and the Catholic. And I thought to take it one step further and to do the blue and white and the red, white, and blue, and have them be at each other's throats. And again, it's like, well, how much should I talk about it without trying to give too much away? Because
Well, we won't talk about, yeah.
there was an element about the hockey thing that, when I did a little bit more research, ended up paying off extremely well for the little trajectory that I wanted to have in the play. That was sort of like it's a subplot. It's kind of a subplot. The hockey thing is a subplot, and also uses a different method of exposition in the play. Some scenes sort of jump out of the play and talk about this hockey issue, and then you jump back into the play, and that became a great source of humor, and also feeds that rivalry. Because I was really happy. I mean, it's true that whatever that joke was that didn't land. But then when you told me afterwards that somebody came up to you after the...
Well, they confronted the actor who's going to play Jean-Claude Delon this summer, Paul Bronstein. We were in this parking lot here, and the man came up to me and said, he got right in Paul's face, and he said, "I just want to understand, somebody told me you actually are a Maple Leafs fan." Toronto Maple Leafs fan, and Paul really is, and so is Ryan Hollyman, who's also playing one of the French bank robbers this summer. They're huge, they bleed blue. And that's the first time I heard the man said, "I bleed blue." How could you say those things about Toronto? And Paul looked at him and said, "Well, they paid me to." And I was playing a character, and he goes, but it was painful for me, man. It was painful. And then they started this thing, and so just me as the director, I watch it, and Alex we were stopped at Subway to get your snacks, and he goes, how's Robert feeling about the first round? And I said, what? He goes, well, Montreal has to play Ottawa in the first round, and then he goes on to this, he launched on this thing about Ottawa had some 22 games of great goaltending. I don't know what it was, and I was like, I don't talk to Robert about hockey, and I haven't talked to him in days, actually.
What are you talking about?
But you immediately came in, and you too. And then Kelsey came in, and Lance came in, and I thought, it is awesome. It's amazing to me. I sit back and I don't get it quite at all. But I'm fascinated by it. I'm fascinated by it in the play. And I have been saying to people that the first preview is on July 30th. And by 6:30, June 30th, thank you, June 30th, oh my gosh, June 30th. And by 6:30, in that, what I assume will be a sold-out house of 350, I will have a sense of what the audience thinks of the Toronto Maple Leafs slagging at the beginning of the play. It could all be very funny, or it could not.
Especially this year. I mean, like, it'd be interesting because Montreal's going into the playoffs and Toronto's not.
It's had its worst season in history, right?
Is it the worst season?
Worst season in history is what I heard.
My lord.
So I'm like, what is this season? What's it going to be like at the farm? What's that?
In recorded history.
In recorded history, okay. But also I didn't realize the play takes, the bank robbery happened on August 31st, 1961, and I've been starting to do all my research, and I didn't realize that was still original 6. Expansions didn't happen until 1967. First of all, I was like, well, no wonder they were always all winning cups. There was only 6 of them. So I was a bit let down when I realized that. But it does make that.
But the New York Rangers, who were one of the original 6 teams, what have they won the cup? Like 7 times maybe in their history? Twice? In their history?
Yeah, twice.
So there you go.
Okay, so there you go. Yeah. So. But I am interested. I love that, and I love it as exactly what you're talking about. It's as much a metaphor for the English and French tension in our country, in our part of the country.
Part of the mosaic of what we are too, and looking for an angle of telling our story somehow inside of the smaller stories. And a specific story between these French bank robbers and this small town becomes a metaphor for Quebec versus Ontario, or Quebec and Ontario inside of Canada. It's like it works on all those levels, I think.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you just quickly about how you started writing opera, because now you've written The Shadow, The House of Mirth, and this one that you're working on. Tell me about opera. It was strange because I always sort of wrote songs too, and poetry, and my wife was doing a workshop for Tapestry New Opera, directing workshop on this new opera piece, and Tapestry develops operas and produces them, and they do a thing called the Libretto Composer Laboratory. The Lib Lab, they call it the Lib Lab.
And so what they do is they get 4 composers and 4 librettists, and over the course of about 10 days, they intermingle them, and over about 48 hours, each team creates an original, like, 5-minute opera. And then they're performed. And then they go to the drawing board and start with another exercise with another team. So I worked with 4 different composers, created 4 different pieces. It was really great, and it really employed the idea of poetry, which has an economy of language, but also of drama, which has a narrative. And I always think of opera as like a poetic narrative of some kind. And then there's other elements to it, like sounds. How do you use sounds, and where do you leave space for music to tell part of the story, and learning sort of how those things balance. So I did this, and it was great. It was it was the day before this Lib Lab was going to go. John Grayson, who's a filmmaker, was going to do the librettist laboratory, and he got an episode directing Queer as Folk, and he had to drop out. And so they said to my wife, who was there on that particular day, do you know of any writers? And she said, Alex Poch-Goldin.
Oh my God, you weren't even in it?
I wasn't part of it at all.
Oh.
And they said, well, we have this thing that starts tomorrow. Do you think you can get him? Do you know his number? She said, he's my husband. So they called me, and they were like, do you want to do this thing tomorrow? And I was like, tomorrow? And then I hemmed and hawed a little bit, and then I said, yeah, sure, I'll do it. And I went in, and I did it, and then oddly enough, I ended up getting a part on that Queer as Folk episode that the director had left to go direct. I ended up doing a recurring role on that. for a bit. And so during that time, I met this fellow, Omar Daniel,
Omar, yeah.
and we had created a piece, short opera called Lisa, which was about this schoolgirl. She's part of a group with two other girls. They get all perfect scores on their math tests all the time. One day, she doesn't write a number clearly. She doesn't get a perfect score on the math test. She's kicked out of the group. So she poisons her friends with lemonade. And then there were stories that came out afterwards of like somebody that was a very similar kind of event that truly happened.
Wow.
Anyway, and then the Opera America conference came. So we did that. It was presented. And then they did the evening of things, and they picked that one, and it was presented. And then Opera America conference came to Toronto, and they did 4. Tapestry was the host, and they did 4 operas at the Isabel Bader, and mine was one of them. And it was great. I had expanded it from like about 5 minutes.
Oh my God, I saw that.
To 15 minutes.
Yeah, I saw that.
They were great. I
Yeah.
was really happy. It's a 2-character piece. And then they commissioned Omar and I to write a longer piece, and I found this story, which was just inspired by it's called The Shadow. And in Barcelona in 1900. If you borrowed money from the mafia, if you didn't pay them back, instead of somebody being sent out to break your legs, they sent out a person called the Shadow. The Shadow would dress up in a tuxedo and top hat, and he would publicly humiliate you. And he would let everybody know that you owed money and that you hadn't paid it and you were untrustworthy and ruin your reputation if you didn't pay back the money. Which is a very fascinating kind of thing, especially the costume that he would wear to do it as well. And so I ended up creating a story, which was fun because I found this little tidbit, and then I created the story. It was a story about a mailman on a route who falls in love with this girl who's under the thumb of her father, and she won't have anything to do with him, but he's in love with her and he just wishes he could change who he was. So one night he decides to woo her as somebody else, as a wealthy merchant, and she bites, and he takes her out for an expensive dinner, and she starts to fall in love with him, and he's in love with her, and then he realizes he doesn't have enough money to pay the bill. So he sends her out, and then he gets into a fight with the waiter, and he stabs him with a fork, and he runs away. And the next day he goes and he borrows money from the mafia. And the mafia's like, can you pay this back? He's like, don't worry, I'm the top postman in my district. But he borrows the money, he goes and he buys the girl a ring, gives the girl a ring, and then time goes by, and he hasn't paid back the mafia. And he starts to get a little bit worried, and then the girl loses the ring. And then the Shadow is unleashed on him and sort of exposes him for being the fraud that he is. And he loses the girl, and he loses his reputation. And it would have just been better off if he had been himself in the first place. And that's kind of like the little parable that it was.
It was a lovely piece. I really
So I was so,
loved it.
I never thought I'd write an opera, and it was like a process of like, I'll put it out there, and I like musicals a lot, and even like some rock operas and stuff, but my composer is extremely classically based. Very modern too, but he would do weird stuff like hang upside down in an electrified field and play musical instruments like through a computer and lasers and stuff.
Was he like a human theremin?
Yeah.
Wow.
He would do this weird thing. I never saw him do it, but I've seen pictures. But we just had varying styles, and I don't read music, and I play a little bit of guitar, but I have a musicality inside of me, I think, in the language as well. And he was able to pick up on that, and we created a very beautiful piece, which unfortunately at this point hasn't been done again. So the chamber piece was like five actors, 5 singers. But I was so proud to do it. And then from there, I got a writing agent, and the writing agent knew James Kudelka. He represented him too, and James was looking for a librettist. And my agent knew that I had written an opera, so he ended up putting us together, and then we started exploring. And it's really funny because when we met the composer, Rodney Sharman, who's a very nice guy. He won a Dora for the project we did, but he's a very prickly character. And I'm sitting across from James, and Rodney's saying, and I'm sitting right there too, and he's like, so this Alex, how do you know him? What work of his have you seen? And James is like, he's just taking it on faith, and we're just kind of proceeding that way. And we've become great friends, and he actually directed me in a play this year out in Barrie. It's not my favorite play, but it was great for him to sort of expand from being a choreographer and trying his directing chops. And
What's it called? The Prince of Hamburg?
Hamburg.
Hamburg, yeah, right.
Very
I heard
dry
very good,
German
but I heard
drama.
good about it.
Yeah, Maya loved it. It's
Yeah.
true. She really did.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
did her husband, but it wasn't my favorite.
And I just want to ask one last thing. So, you have your finger in lots of pots to create a career. Acting, some directing, writing. But there was a dry period where you went a completely different way over the last 5 or 6, 7 years. with your brother's staff.
Oh, God.
But
It didn't
right-
make us any money, but yeah. But who knows? The future is bright. Let's look optimistically towards the future. We make smoked meat. We make Montreal smoked meat. And,
In Toronto.
In Toronto.
And why? Why did you decide to do
Well, we're
this?
from Montreal and we love smoked meat, so that's number one. Number two, I had bought, when I bought a house, I bought a barbecue. My brother and I decided we would both buy barbecues, but we'd buy different kinds. So I went out and bought a Centro, I don't know, for $250 or something. He was like, that's the one I was going to buy. And it's like, well, why did you, yeah, anyway, he sort of mad at me. So he went out and he bought another barbecue that had a smoker in it. And my brother's kind of a Renaissance character. He does a lot of things. He's quite a bright guy. And so he started experimenting with smoking things. And he made some smoked salmon and he made smoked meat one time. It's like, he comes over to my house and he's like, I had smoked meat, I made smoked meat, smoked meat. He's like, this is terrible, this is terrible. It was terrible. And so I started doing quality control of the smoked meat. And we started to talk about it, and initially we were using Schwartz's from Montreal, famous delicatessen, their spices, but then my brother analyzed their spices and created his own mix. And then he also had to figure out the salts, and then there's the regular salts that you use, and then there's the what's the word? I forget the word.
Curing.
The curing salts, nitrates and the nitrites. And so, you know, how much do you put in, and etc. So this sort of amount of information is available on the internet, and beyond that, it's kind of like taste and decide. And we ended up coming up with a product that was extremely good.
Very
It
good.
was really good. And I started to sell it through the theater community, and people began to hear about it, and they would.
During Pontypool, the freezer at the farm was filled with smoked meat. We all had to buy some and give them all.
People would get it for Christmas and stuff. So what we did was like, you know, somebody, I posted on Chowhound. You're not supposed to post your own stuff on Chowhound. It's for other people to post. I didn't really know that. Or maybe I did. I'm not saying. But I posted something and then they took it down. But somebody had received the posting, and they were a big Montreal smoked meat fan, and they begged Chowhound to let them write a review because the guy contacted me and ordered a fatty piece, and he loved it. And it's really hard to get the real thing. If you go to Kaplansky, say, it's a completely different thing. It's not authentic stuff. He makes it himself. It's just not Montreal smoked meat. It's a different thing. You can like it or not. That's your business. I don't care about it. So we would make it, and then people would say like, oh yeah, I want to come over and get a 3-pound decal. I'd be like, okay. And they would come, and I had a wooden mailbox, and they would come, and they would open my mailbox if I wasn't home, mostly, or I just let them do it, and I would put it out there, and they would come, open the mailbox, take out the smoked meat, put in a check or a little envelope of cash, and go away and eat the smoked meat, and maybe post something about it online or not. And we did that for about 2 years. And did you ever try it? Did you ever try it? And it was not a particularly successful business, but created sort of like its own legacy, and it was really very fine.
But you also went up against
Oh, yeah,
Zane
so then
Kaplansky at the smoked meat.
We got invited to the deli duel. Stop Community Center. There were 3 places that participated, and Kaplansky's was one of them. And in the first year, we lost to him by 5 votes. And we were 5 people, and we all didn't vote. And then the next year, we were extremely organized, and we made sure that we told everybody to vote, and we beat him the second year. So we were really happy. We got the trophy, and then they stopped it, so we have the trophy. I don't know if they'll ever bring it out again. And then I remember seeing on Kaplansky had posted on Twitter, all he wrote was the agony of defeat. And I was so happy, because we just wanted to crush him. If he was making smoked meat that I wanted to go and eat, that would be fine, but he wasn't. And then we started making it out of the 3 Times Cafe, and we did that for 2 years. And they had a very unorthodox style of making it, but sometimes it could be extremely good. We made it downstairs, and but again, we weren't really making very much money doing it. We thought it might open the door to something else, and maybe in a sense it did, because we put together a website, and there was a fellow who contacted us who had gone to Europe 20 years ago and had tried to sell smoked meat, because they don't eat the brisket in Europe. They chop it up and feed it to animals. So it's very cheap as well. So he went online. He had been in Paris and had made contracts with a lot of large organizations at the time. Mind you, this is 20 years ago, to sell smoked meat to the French and to start licensing a process for doing it. And then mad cow disease broke out a few days later, and it was all scuttled, and nothing ever happened with it. And so then he started thinking about it again, and he went online and he saw our website, and he contacted us, and he came down from Ottawa, and he tried our smoke meat, and he loved it. And so we've been working with him to create a commercial product, because it's, our product, when we're making it, it's like, it takes 2 weeks to make, and you need fire to do it, to smoke it as well. And so it's cumbersome and it's demanding, and not everybody can do it. We looked for commercial opportunities to do that, and we came up with another process, which is not the same thing that we were doing before. And I would love, in a sense, to open up a delicatessen and do it the old-fashioned way sometime. But in the meantime, trying to create a product that can be licensed abroad and hopefully make some money. And actually, my brother came up with this process because he was gifted that way. And it's extremely delicious. I was really impressed with the thing that it is, even though it's not the thing that we took our greater pride in.
So, so what are you working on right now? It's got a couple more minutes. What are you working on now for writing? Can I ask about the Tarragon project, or is that secret?
No, it's not secret.
Okay, because I think it's fascinating.
It is. It's an interesting story. So I'm doing this Against Nature musical thing with James Kudelka and Coleman Linnea Dance Company.
And James Rolfe, right?
And James Rolfe. And I started to work on this fourth line play, The Great Shadow, which we're going to do.
Reminiscence next Sunday afternoon in Trenton, Ontario. We have information about it.
And then there's another project after I had developed this play, The Life of Jude, through the Tarragon. And then they sort of dropped it, they weren't going to produce it, and we remounted it, and we did finally the production. And the artistic director of that theater came and saw it. I didn't think he was going to come. He showed up, he didn't have any money. We couldn't get him a comp because you have to write out the comps in advance, so we actually had to pay for his ticket. But he did pay us back because he called me in and he gave me a sort of commission to write a musical. And the musical that I proposed is about, it's based on a true story, that it's the basic story, and I don't know what the whole project is, but it's about Sam Bronfman, who ran Seagram's, who emigrated from Russia and was a Russian Jew, and came over to Saskatchewan, was living in Saskatchewan, making whiskey and selling it to Al Capone. And Moose Jaw was what they called Little Chicago at the time. And there were tunnels that ran underneath the city that had been built by the Chinese who were hiding from the head tax that the government had imposed. So to not pay it, it was like $10 I believe at the time, it was a lot of money, and they wanted to try to bring over their founders and stuff. So they went underground and they hid there. And then those caverns underneath the ground ended up being an area that liquor was made and transported to trains and cars to be able to be out of sight from the authorities and get it into the States. So Capone used to come up there, and he ended up having his tonsils taken out there by a local guy, and also Bronfman's brother-in-law ended up getting shot and killed just outside of the town. So I don't know all the details of how that happened, but I'm going to draw something. And it's going to be a story about Bronfman and Capone doing business together, something about the tonsils and that whole world as well as the Chinese who were all working on the railroad at the time, and the building of these tunnels underground, the shooting of the brother, and I'm not exactly sure where it's going to end at this point, but it's just great to have, again, I'm using the fourth line kind of model as a way of how can I gather this information and find a roadmap through it. I mean, I've learned that through developing plays for fourth line, and so that project is, I'm a little behind on it now. I'm going to try and come up with something substantial for 6 weeks from now, because
You have a 3-day workshop, right?
No, it's for a different thing.
Oh, that's a different thing. Oh,
But
okay.
I have to give them something, and so hopefully it'll be good and inspired, and the deadline will inspire me to some form of brilliance. And then we'll do another talk.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask if anyone here had any questions for Alex that I might have missed. I tend to make pretty thorough on these things, but is there something else that you wanted to ask Alex about? Anybody?
Can I ask you one?
Robert, and then
Yeah,
here,
it's
yes.
It's my own fetish. The most famous or quirky TV or film actor you've ever worked with, or any stories? Because you've done a lot of television and film. Any stories in your history of working with people?
Interesting. No. Little tidbits. Like what stands out as being extraordinary? I don't know. I worked with Russell Crowe. I did Cinderella Man. I was cut out of it, but I worked with him. He had, I believe, he had thrown a dwarf, and he also
In the movie or just
he had a
around?
guy. There was a guy who was his assistant. He would berate. He would berate him. He needed a sounding board, like humiliating him. I think the guy ended up having a massive heart attack because of the abuse that he had incurred. And when the day that he showed up, we were on Queen Street. It was the summertime. And we had one day, Ron Howard was directing this picture about James Braddock, who was a boxer, and became world champion. And they made Queen Street East snow. They made it snow. It was a very hot day. It was melting and stuff. And they had to jump ahead scenes because he was in a tizzy. He wouldn't come out. And then when he did come out, Ron Howard knew my name and he knew the person I was working with. And then he introduced us to Russell Crowe when he finally got there. And I remember standing beside Russell and like looking at him and just looking at his ears. I wasn't like oh my God, it's Russell Crowe. It's like you kind of can't do that. Kind of like I got to be here to do the job that I do, not to be starstruck. It wasn't going to help anything. But he had cauliflower ears because they had put prosthetics on his ears.
Oh.
And I was just looking at that, and then he like turned to me and went like, "How's it going, mate?" It's like, "Good, good." Because I wasn't trying to infringe on him in any way. I remember I worked with Judy Davis on the Judy Garland story, and she was very lovely. And we ended up I was supposed to do 5 scenes. It got cut down to 1 before we ever filmed it. And but talking with her about the Olympics, and she was it's when they were going to be in Sydney, and she was very against it. She didn't. She thought it was a bad thing. And it was the first time that I thought of like what the ramifications of the Olympics are on a city. There's devastation that happened. And then I had a very wonderful time. I worked on the Kennedys, and I was up for this series, and I really wanted this series, and I went back for 3 callbacks, Ken Finkelman series, and I didn't get it. But in the midst of it all, I got like 5 days on the Kennedys, about John F. Kennedy presidency, and I worked with Greg Kinnear and what's his name?
Barry Pepper?
No, I didn't work with Barry Pepper. Tom, who played the senior.
Not Tom Wilkinson.
Tom Wilkinson.
Right.
Who I like very much as an
Yeah.
actor, and it was just interesting to talk with him because
Were you a campaign manager?
I played his campaign
Manager, that's right.
and I had like 5 days, and I hung out with Tom Wilkinson and Greg Kinnear a little bit, but Tom Wilkinson that whole time, and I was smoking in those days, and he was smoking too, and we were shooting at Casa Loma, which is where I actually got married, and we were hanging out there, and then I'm like sitting out there with him saying like, you know, what projects did you enjoy working on? And he was just very personable, and he named a couple of things, and I had seen him in a couple of things too, and talked about that, and then he said like, I said, you consider yourself a character actor, and he's like, well, yes, I do. Yes, I do. I don't buy that kind of stuff like the Daniel Day-Lewis, like, oh, look at me act, I'm a great actor, look at me act. That wasn't the sort of way that he subscribed to things. But we hung out, and then I gave him some smoked meat.
As you do.
I don't know what he did with it, and it was interesting because he also he talked a little bit about salt beef in Britain, but he had been given, you know, these guys they make so much money on these films and stuff, and he came up to me one time. He was like, "What's it like in your trailers? Is it okay?" I was like, "Yeah, no, the air conditioning's good. It was a very hot day." He's like, "Oh, okay, good." And then I realized afterwards he was going to invite me to come to his Winnebago and hang out, but he was, you know, there was, if I would have said, "Oh, it's really hot," and he would say, "Oh, we'll come and sit." Yeah, but he didn't. And I gave him a play of mine to read, and we chatted a bit about that, cringeworthy.
Yeah.
And then the other thing was I was going to say is that they're so wealthy, and he's a down to earth kind of guy. But they gave him like a big flat screen TV, like because you know, Sony or whatever company was somehow associated with the project. So for the stars, they gave this thing, and he gave it to his driver. He's like, "I don't need that. What do I need that for? I don't even watch TV. I don't know how to use a computer." Anyway, so I mean, those are just 3 little things.
And you just did a movie with Susan Sarandon,
I
didn't you?
did a movie with Susan Sarandon. She was very lovely. A film called The Calling, and she was great. And it was funny. It was interesting though because it's like, again, it's like I admire her work a lot. She's an Academy Award-winning actress. But I had to do my job, and my job was like my mother had been decapitated by a murderer. So I was upset, and I just found out the news, and so I'm sitting there and getting the news, and I'm like, I'm weeping about the fact that my mother's dead. Well, she's talking to me about it and stuff. It's like, but to be in a state of grief and make it realistic, and if I was trying to make myself cry or be able to use inner waterworks and stuff like that, but also be honest and stuff, it takes a lot of focus. So I didn't sit around and talk to her a lot. In the end, she did. She talked about, we never had a proper introduction. I'm Alex and I'm Sue's kind of thing. We just ended up at the table together. It was snowing outside. It was very pretty. And then she started talking at one point about how she had pneumonia. She had pneumonia because she had been in New York during 9/11. And she had ingested stuff. And now she's more susceptible. And I learned that there's actually what do you call a vaccination against pneumonia, which I never do. But she was quite lovely. And then when I left, on the end I went and I gave her a hug, and she said, "I think you'll be very happy with your work." And it was just nice to have her say that, even though they cut out one of my finals.
You had a question here?
Yes, I want to pitch an idea. There, for a play that I really want to see produced. There are two brothers, and they each buy a barbecue. Wait, you haven't heard the play yet.
Okay.
And then there's this evil empire of smoked meat producers. And then they have a contest, and I don't know how it ends, but could you do that play someday?
I need a title, maybe Battle of the Briskets would be.
Or Brisket Battle. We can do anything.
Very nice.
We'll talk, call my agent.
Yeah, awesome. Maud, did you have a real question? What's your question, quickly?
Okay. Have you ever based a play on your childhood?
Good question.
I think, childhood inspires a lot of ideas as a man, as a person grown up. I wouldn't say that I based it on my childhood, but I interestingly enough, I have been writing a book for a number of years, and it's based on my childhood. And I think I've put that channel of ideas into that. And it's about growing up in Montreal. It's about the fantasy of a little girl who is my sister in the book, and she vanishes into a snowdrift one morning and disappears. And it's a metaphor for a number of things and stuff. But I explore the life without her, and how the family doesn't even acknowledge that she's missing, and she'll come back at a later point and stuff like that. But so I've channeled it into a novel instead of a play. It's harder to get. You could turn it into a play and have adults playing, smaller parts. And I think everything that I write comes from a place of my experience, and so that involves my childhood.
That was a nice question, Maud. Thanks. Oh yes, absolutely.
Hey, how are you? Great interview, great stuff. Thanks, Kim.
Yeah.
Alex, I just had a question about, you mentioned like your different subjects for plays, and we were just talking about how you find the subject to blend. So you said you don't really stay to one genre, like you play around in different genres and stuff. I guess, is that something you ever find you meet resistance in your work in terms of like that, novelists, certain novelists, they write like Agatha Christie, for example, just writes murder mysteries, that's it, she doesn't deal with anything else. Colin McCullough writes historical dramas and things, very researched historical dramas. But you mentioned that you've written a number of different styles and genres. Could you just extrapolate on that a bit?
I mean, again, I go back to just the idea that, like, as an actor, like when you're gonna do a Shakespeare play versus doing a Neil Simon play versus doing maybe a Grand Guignol kind of horror show play, it involves different aspects of yourself. You kind of like the language and the character puts you in a particular mindset. You begin to explore on that level. Sometimes things are very down to earth and naturalistic, and you're like just in the moment being you, whatever thing. And then in another place you may be having to speak and, et cetera, et cetera. So I think somehow, just on that basic level, I understand the idea of those different genres inside of me. And so I don't think I set out to, I think probably each play can be compared to somebody. Like my play Cringeworthy started off as, I was backstage with my friend David, and we were doing a show at Cannes Stage, and we talked about characters that used to be like larger than life, where the character was the play, and Uriah Heep, what's his name, Fagin, and just where the characters and the Dickensian kind of style of things was descriptive of who the people were. So we came up with a name of a character named Cringeworthy.
Right.
And so that was the character's name, and then I began to fashion a melodrama around it, and it was very mustachy, twirling kind of thing. And then I did development with Chris Abraham on the play, he's director and dramaturge, and we kind of cut away the stuff that was a little bit larger than life, and tried to find a guy who was maybe a bit psychopathic. He ended up being an opium dealer, who was also
Was he a moneylender as well?
he was a moneylender, and he also he was very successful at taking revenge on people who didn't pay him back. In a sense, it was a sister piece to the Shadow in a way.
Yeah. I always thought of those two walking together.
It had
Yeah.
a similar kind of thing. So I just knew that I wanted to explore that guy, and I wrote a little piece, and then that piece became a half-hour piece, and then a half-hour presented, and then the half piece became bigger. But in the end, it ended up being more like a Strindberg piece.
Right.
This hotel ended up, it's a surreal sex farce fantasy. Jim and Shorty, very naturalistic play with just two guys who are out on the street. And I don't know, I mean, like, I heard those voices somewhere, and the voices just opened a door, and then I was able to walk through that door.
Yeah.
And I just, I don't know, I'm grateful for it, but I have for myself, an ear for dialogue, and I can hear when people talk the way they talk and when they don't. And so if I'm going to create kind of a heightened world, I have to raise the quality of language. And if I'm going to try and keep something down to earth, it's going to be over here. If there's going to be a fantastical element, you have to introduce some kind of fantastical element. And then you open doors to go places that you never expected to go. I remember with my play Yahrzeit, which was very much family based. I looked in myself probably more than any other play for that. And then suddenly another character showed up, the sister, Jackie. And I remember Iris was like, no, you don't need that, you don't need that. But I was like, I need this character, I really need this character. And she just sort of exploded out of nowhere, and she gave me so much in the play, and became the main obstacle between the father and his journey. So I just think I don't want to repeat myself, you know. Ultimately, maybe I do, maybe I will, big deal, I'm not going to go to jail. But it's just that it's just nice to explore a different road. And I remember I was nominated for the Seminovich Prize one year in playwriting, and my friend had written the treatise about it, and he just wrote that, you know, I had transplanted myself from Montreal to Toronto, and I was sort of like a person who didn't have a home anymore, and I sort of existed outside of a realm. I worked in places, but I was also independent, and that was a marker of myself, that I was kind of indefinable in a way.
Right.
And I could just kind of like that for myself, to kind of go like, you know what, you can do whatever you want when people aren't expecting you to do the same thing again and again. So.
Right, which I think is very good. I think like great writers that do that. Shakespeare did that, and you know, comedies, dramas, and everything.
Yeah, totally.
Pigeonholing of these areas, and it's obvious. You want to let that happen. And just one little tidbit of information on local color for the Capone. Supposedly had a hunting cabin up in Quaidville.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's going
Bombardier, too.
to make any that meeting between Winnipeg and Montreal.
The same place at
There was a little
Combermere.
cabin.
A safe house there?
At Combermere?
Just up Palmer Rapids, it's up just north of Apsley, I think. So it's kind of, it's not really local, it's more Ottawa River Valley, but it's very.
I smell a fourth line Tarragon Theatre.
So do I. That's my favorite. Well, I am so excited that you will all get to see the Bad Luck Bank Robbers. We go into rehearsals in 6 weeks. We have a few of our actors in the audience today, Lorna and Marlis and Rob. I think that's the three. And yeah, I'm and Maud Rose. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I will pay for that. And Alex, I'm so glad you came and spent some time chatting with me about it all. It's just thrilling. And thank you all for coming on this beautiful day. And we're going to see you at the farm very soon. Have a great rest of your day.
Our ticket sales.
Ticket sales, best-selling season ever. I just warn you, organize your tickets soon so you're not disappointed. That's what I can say. Phones are ringing like we've never seen it before.
Good stuff. That was great.
That's good, eh?
You'll be at the museum, yes.
Hi, how are you?